Well, welcome everyone to it's either our sixth or seventh End of Life Tech for Healthcare. We get together about once a month, me and my dear friend, Dr. Silvia Perez-Protto from the Cleveland Clinic, to chat about what are the most remarkable end of life technology solutions that we've come across in our work in the end of life space. My name's Michael Hebb, and I'm the founder of EOL.community and Death Over Dinner. And I'm going to turn it over to Silvia to say hello and tell us a little bit about what's going on at the Cleveland Clinic.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure, as always, to meet you in this space. I'm Silvia Perez-Protto. I'm the director for the End of Life Center at the Office of Patient Experience here at the Cleveland Clinic. And the good news is that we are working on an end-of-life course for ICU professionals that is going to be in English and with subtitles in Spanish and Portuguese, because it's for South America, Europe, and United States. We are offering MOCA credits, CME credits, all these things. And also, we have the endorsement of the Society of Critical Care Medicine and the Nursing Society of Critical Care Medicine. And we are going to offer this, holistic approach of end of life in the ICU. I think it's a unique opportunity for people all over the world to see what we are doing and share experiences. So I'm very excited about that. And we are going to close with a Death Over Dinner that is going to be in 3 languages. So I'm very excited about it.
Wow, yeah, it's beautiful to see. And I think it's the first time we've done a trilingual Death Over Dinner event. For those of you who are wondering what this murder mystery concept called Death Over Dinner is, it's not a murder mystery. It is a place for people, or an experience for people to talk about their mortality, their end-of-life wishes, their fears, their anxieties. And you can learn more about it at deathoverdinner.org. And just a quick update from EOL before we meet our esteemed presenters and speakers and founders. We are just now launching a new course. Well, it's actually a course that's been going on for a couple of years, but now it's being hosted on EOL with some new functionality, and that's the Writing and Grief course by author Megan Devine. And her book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, has been, read around the world multiple times. And so we now have a monthly course with her that is extraordinary. And a book club that's coming up. We just launched EOL book clubs. And the first one is with Megan Devine's new journal. And then we have an incredible book club coming up with Koshin Paley Ellison from the New York Zen Center of Contemplative Care and his book, Awake at the Bedside. So those are some of the things that are happening at EOL. And we just started the functionality to allow other providers, other organizers, other event creators to host events on EOL. We've been hosting events with something like, 7,000 RSVPs over the last 6 or 7 months. And we just now are allowing other folks to host events on the platform and reach our audience. And so get in touch if you're interested in that. And without further ado, we're gonna move to our 3 featured speakers. We often have guests that speak about a spectrum of experiences. Today, we're really focused on grief, end-of-life rituals and memorials, and what happens to your body. Which for me is, and I know Silvia believes this too, an essential part of what we call the continuum of care when it comes to taking care of a family, taking care of an individual, is to actually have a plan that extends all the way through to when a person dies and how we grieve them, how we memorialize them, how we honor them. And so with that, we're going to hand the stage over to a wonderful human being who I've gotten to know through the process of doing this work and who I just admire greatly, and that's Fran, the founder of Heal Grief and Actively Moving Forward. Fran?
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much, and I'm thrilled to be here with your guests as well. So I'm going to add a bit to what you were just saying insofar as, you know, memorializing someone, honoring someone, but then also caring for yourself when you're grieving. And I just want to share a brief story. I didn't come from this field. I was an entrepreneur. I come out of the lingerie industry. But my encounter with grief was after the death of my father. And I did what I think most people think they're supposed to do who aren't familiar with what bereavement care is. And the day of the funeral, I grieved. The next day, I put my grief in a box, got myself ready for work, put a pretty little bow on the box, tucked it up on a shelf, and thought I was supposed to get over it and move on. And about 5 years later, my daughter was born. And her birth gave me so much grief. And I didn't understand why. And I was very fortunate. I had a friend who was actually in the bereavement care field. And after diving into it, realized that it wasn't the birth of my daughter that caused me grief. It was that my father wasn't here to see the one thing he wanted more than anything in the world, and that was a granddaughter. And that completely changed my life and was a gift because it probably changed the relationship that I ended up having with my daughter 19 years later. So I put my entrepreneur skills and I embarked into the field of bereavement. And in my quest, I realized that there were very few resources. And so that was really the inspiration behind Heal Grief. It started out as a database over a decade ago, capturing resources from across the country, trying to present them to individuals seeking supportive services. And in that, it became a chameleon of so many things. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to indulge your audience in, it's about a 90-second video that kind of encompasses what Heal Grief stands for, its mission and what we do. And then I'd like to focus in on an app that we've created. So I'm going to just share my screen and give me 1 second here. And I'm going to play this video. So thank you for allowing me to share that. So we at Heal Grief believe that no one should ever grieve alone. We understand that one of the first feelings of grief is a sense of isolation. And when someone is newly bereaved, there's a lot of family and friends, usually there are a lot of family and friends that are there supporting individuals. But then when they go back into their lives, the person that's grieving is left alone. So we were primed actually as a virtual entity. We are not a bricks and mortar. We have always been a virtual entity. And we are we're primed to continue the virtual support with an app. Just to take a step back, Actively Moving Forward was initially a program that served grieving college students on campuses throughout the United States. And in serving these young adults, we realized that for us to stay relevant and virtual, we needed to step up our game. And we created an app that was initially specific for young adults, but now our over 30s community is filled with almost 1,000 members. And right at one's fingertips, there is a database we think is second to none of various grief support resources that are out there, ways to memorialize a loved one and to continue their memory, reading materials, and a community where you can actually connect with others. The app is a hybrid of text messaging, where you can do direct and group text messaging with other community members. The database, it's a notification center where people receive inspirational quotes, and like a Facebook feed where people can ask community members questions. And all of our members have the opportunity to have facilitated support conversations and book clubs too. We were actually very primed, not having a crystal ball that social distancing was going to be an issue a year and a half ago. We were primed for virtual connections. And so our app is what we consider to be a step up, an additional supportive service for those who want to be able to connect 24/7 and virtually to other members that are grieving. We have community members actually from all over the world. I would say 95% of our members are from the United States, but we do have members from all over the world. And we're looking to expand our network and our virtual support in other countries and languages as well. So I want to thank you for allowing me to share that as the additional supportive service after someone has died.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got so many questions about COVID grief and what you've learned in the last year building this, but we're gonna wait till the end. So I'm gonna push pause on my curiosity, and I believe that Noha is next. Is that right? Did I know? No, I'm questioning Earl. I think it's Noha. And Noha is the founder of a remarkable organization called GatheringUs. It is also a digital resource. And Noha and I met through the creation of the COVID paper, covidpaper.org.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So take it away, Noha. Tell us about GatheringUs.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. So GatheringUs is an online platform as well as a virtual memorial and virtual funeral service company. Our mission is to bring communities together to support each other and celebrate the lives of their loved ones. My first experience with gathering from afar, or not gathering from afar, I should say, was when I was 10 years old and my grandmother died in Israel, and my family's spread out throughout Israel and Argentina. And we, at the time, were undocumented in the US and could not go to the funeral, as well as my other cousins who were living across the country. And my aunt, who was in Israel alone with my grandfather, really struggled and felt very alone. My mom felt very guilty about not being there. And that death really, in a way, became a foundational break in my family. It was something that everyone struggled with so much. My aunt and my grandfather would visit her grave every week for years, and kind of never were able to recover from it. That was something that was very formative for me, and really seeing how tragic a death could be, especially when people aren't able to come together and celebrate their loved ones and get support from their communities. As I grew up, I met my husband, who has a large Irish family. And when you have a lot of people, you also have a lot of death. And I had exposure to their version of funerals. So over the last couple of decades, we organized 12 funerals in his family. And they were beautiful celebratory events where everyone came together and was there to support each other. And I realized that there's a huge learning curve to how to grieve and how to come together and how to go through the mourning process. So I wanted to create something that would help families come together and get support from their communities. I launched GatheringUs back in 2018, way before COVID, originally with online memorial pages where everyone could share memories and stories and photos and videos. They could post about the various events, make donations to the family for funeral expenses or for a charity. And that grew. We've had millions of visitors to the platform, and they've donated over $1 million through the platform. Throughout that whole time, for over a year, we had on our product roadmap this question of how do we bring people together when they can't be together in person? And when COVID hit, we finally had an answer to it. And we created virtual funerals and virtual memorials. And actually our product manager, who was our first hire, had previously done virtual training. So she had a lot of experience in how to facilitate online events and how to bring people on board and the tech support that it would require. And so back in March 11th, when things hadn't even shut down yet, we started going out to funeral homes and to churches and synagogues and telling them about it. And everybody said, oh, a Zoom funeral? That sounds so weird. And within a few weeks, people started calling us back. And the response was tremendous. We actually did over 500 funerals in the last year. We grew our team from 3 people to 30 people. We've had over 60,000 guests attend our events. And we've done everything from completely virtual events to hybrid events where, at first some people were there, when people could gather 10 people in person, to now full in-person events with also full remote guests. So it's been an incredibly gratifying experience. The feedback we get from people is amazing. And in particular, what's been most surprising is that we hear consistently from the families that this event was much more personal and connected and meaningful than most in-person funerals that they've ever been to. I think there's a number of reasons for that. One is that, as you can see right here, we're all up close and personal. We can see each other's faces. Whereas in a regular in-person event, you're mostly seeing everybody's backs, right? Because you're in rows. And so you actually don't get to see people's response and their reaction. And you don't feel as up close. You also can't, send a message in the chat, that song was beautiful, or lovely speech, or, all the feedback loop that doesn't happen in an audience in person. The other reason why I think it's been in particularly meaningful is that a lot of the work that we do is actually holding the family's hand in advance of the event with the planning process in order to make a very personal event that is unique to them and to their loved one. And so we're able to include many elements that previously might not have been included. And in a way, the fact that they have been doing something different means that they don't feel bound by the traditional rituals or playbook that they've always had, right? Historically, people say, oh, I'm supposed to do this because this is how we've always done it. And I don't want to, dishonor my loved one in some way. Over the last year, in a way, people have had that lifted, right? And they've been given the liberty to actually think about what is significant about my loved one, what would make this personal for me and meaningful for me and my community. And so we've done, everything from really unique toasts to, we had a man who loved race cars and all of his friends did a race car salute, gentlemen, start your engines, and everybody went around. We've done fireworks on the screen, ice cream socials, everyone on the screen wearing purple because that was the person's favorite color, or bringing, Diet Pepsi because it was their favorite drink. So really interesting and unique things. And we're able to really engage the audience and the community. People are able to share all of their stories and participate in a way that they might not have been able to do before. It's been a really amazing experience. And now as things are opening up, we are transitioning to focus on both hybrid events, where we are so far doing a lot of it still virtually, where we can literally help families set up the AV systems, large screens and projectors, and work in a venue, in the funeral home or a church or even a wedding venue, and really connect all of those pieces. And then obviously there's still some events that are still completely virtual. For instance, we did one with a company where the company hired us because their employees were all over the country. So 150 people logged in from all over. And even in normal times, these people were not all going to fly in for an event, right? And so giving people an opportunity to do those. And then the other piece we're really focusing on now is international communities. Due to my personal experience and seeing what that looks like, we have a whole team that can do Spanish events. And so we do a lot with Latin America and Mexico, and then certainly in India over the last few months, and Southeast Asia, where there's so much need and so many of the families are geographically dispersed. That's another key area. 14% of the US population was born in another country. So there's a lot of need for people, in addition to the fact that most of us move around a lot. And so even within the US, communities are very geographically dispersed. And there's always someone who can't be there, whether because they can't travel, they can't afford to, their health doesn't allow it, their mobility, or there's just a time constraint. So yeah, I'll stop there and I'll take questions later.
Thank you, Noha. It's so inspiring and so necessary. Again, my curiosity, I'm going to have to just hold. So many questions, but we're going to turn it over to my friend David, who I originally met, I believe, via Endwell, or at least planning about Endwell, going and meeting there. Maybe we had chats before, and have been so impressed with what you and your team have created in a space that not all of us talk about all the time, which is cremation, and really brought such a modern and, you know, just customer focused thoughtfulness to this experience. And so tell us about Solace.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thanks for the introduction. You know what, we actually met maybe a couple of years ago, and we talked about EOL and how you're going to create that company. So we're just excited to actually be doing something with you right now, particularly, you know, through COVID slowed things down. And so thank you for inviting us, inviting me to be part of this. Very excited. My name is Dave Odsuanya. I'm the co-founder of Solas Cremation, as Michael introduced. I am actually going to indulge you with a few slides. So I'm going to turn that off, share some images. And see where we go with this. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to explain who we are, why we kind of started, and the product that we created. So, oops. Again, my name's Dave Odsuanya. My co-founder, the good-looking guy on the right, is Keith Crawford. Very similar to Fran, actually. You know, the idea of actually getting into death care was as far from where we started in our lives and our careers as you can possibly imagine. So Keith and I worked at Nike for over 20 years. I was the vice president of design for global brand design, which is a marketing hand of Nike. Keith was the global creative director, vice president of design for brand Jordan. So all of our careers always been around this idea of health and fitness and wellness. We left in 2018, started our own design agency, which, you know, for anybody who's thinking of starting any kind of agency, it'd be good to start with some clients. We didn't have any clients to begin with, so it was a lot of fun. And so we spent a lot of time actually just thinking about what could we do. You know, we've built other brands up in our careers. What if we just did something for ourselves? And Keith had said, well, what if we get into this idea of death care, to which I just started to laugh. you know, and said, you must be kidding, right? You know, I've worked with sports all of my life, and now you're talking about death. But what was really interesting is went away and we talked about it a little bit, spoke with my wife, who was horrified to begin with. But then, you know, we started to look at, there's two reasons. We started to look at an area that really needed to be disrupted in some way that hasn't changed for decades. But two, an area where, you know, where the consumer need is really, could really so much be better than it is today. And very much like the other two speakers, it's like, you know, how could we disrupt an industry that hasn't been disrupted in a while? So the question becomes, you know, we go from sneakers to death care. Why would we do that? So there's two very simple reasons. One, very personal. And then, as I said earlier, you know, the second one is, you know, looking at an industry, it's very rare to find an area that you can go in there and have an immediate or, you know, and a long-term impact. And we looked at this area and just thought, you know, this is an opportunity here for us to do something good. And so for the first reason, I'm going to play a very short video and then kind of give you help you understand why.
My dad was an architect, and he was always taking photos. We'd go on a family vacation, and he'd take millions of pictures. Then we'd get back home and sit down for the slideshow. And basically, it would be building after building after building. And occasionally, if we were lucky, one of us kids might sneak into the foreground. He was truly an architect at heart, and I miss him.
So interestingly enough, both Keith and I lost parents around the same time. And Keith's experience was very much, first, one, you're dealing with the moment someone passes, which is horrific to most people. Then you're having to deal with having to organize it, right? And so, his dad had organized and did some pre-need, some pre-planning. But still, Keith kind of left the experience thinking, why is it stuck in the 19th century? Why was this experience, why did we have to communicate with fax machines? Why did we have to go to the funeral home twice to discuss the same things? Why is it that, my dad had spent a lot of time planning this, but we still ended up, or they tried to have us pay more money and equated, paying more money with, doing the right thing for your parents. And so he left it thinking, at the time, there has to be a better way. That, why isn't anybody approach this? And there's good reason, because it's hard, but why doesn't anybody approach this to make this a better experience? And then the second reason, as I said earlier, it's like, there's very few industries that you can disrupt. But more importantly for us, this is a guiding principle. We really want to serve families and put families at the center of the experience, because when someone passes away, as we all know, and particularly in the fields that you guys are in, it's one, you have to deal with the death, and then you have to deal with the organization. And so for us, we wanted to take a very traditional system and a very traditional model and make it a digital one, bring it into the 21st century in many ways. And most importantly, the goal was to really make a difficult time easier, take away some of the stress that you experienced. My sister-in-law passed away maybe a year ago. And, by then I had a very good understanding of what it took. The business was running. But even for me, dealing with the hospital, it was really stressful, and there was very little information that was given to me. And even though I understood what I was doing, I was a little perplexed by that. So, for us, it's, how do we take a difficult time and make it easier for families? So we created this digital first, direct to consumer death care brand. It's really focused around cremation. You guys are getting a sneak peek at Solace Cares 2.0, which we're going to update in the next month or so. So for us, there's three things that we want to achieve and that we kind of started out to achieve. Develop this idea of a seamless end-to-end cremation experience, direct cremation experience, which really, looks at, the idea of understanding that, right now, the preferred disposition, particularly on the West Coast, 60 to 7% is cremation. And so we wanted to kind of take that statistic and build something great with it, and understand that there's an opportunity there. Our goal, as I said, was to move away from this traditional model into a more simple, modern, and honest model. Simple really meaning, you know, instead of having to go to the funeral home twice or 3 times, you know, and again, that's a generalization, doesn't always happen that way. But for us, you know, we wanted to give our families an option. And you, to be candid with you, you can arrange a cremation online within 5 minutes. Or you can call, you know, one of our care team members, but it's very simple and it's very straightforward in the way you approach it. No trips to the funeral home, mobile friendly, very convenient from wherever you are. And then honest, you know, we just want to be very transparent. And, you know, the traditional way of many funeral homes operate is they may give you actually a low price to begin with, but guaranteed you will leave the experience paying more money. And that happened with me with my mom. She pre-planned, met with the funeral home and ended up paying $2,000 more for a casket that was going to be cremated, which at the time I'm like, why would we do that? But we felt that was my mom would have been horrified actually, because, you know, the idea that we spent more money on her cremation would have been just beyond her comprehension. So, you know, for us, we've got these 3 core elements that make up Solace Cares, but it's a digital model. We want to be simple, modern, and honest. And, you know, at the end of the day, and we learned this from Nike, consumers decide and families decide. And we knew it would be difficult entering this field. We've built great relationships with the hospital, hospice communities, trying to understand, you know, end of life, the transition into, you know, afterlife and what the family needs to experience. And so, you know, we've had great results so far, amazing reviews from families. And again, families decide. But more importantly, we've had, you know, and again, to get 1 review is amazing, to get over 100 reviews. And we started mid-2019 on this endeavor. And, you know, we've served over 1,000 families. And, you know, in terms of growth, we've seen pretty dramatic growth. And we continue to see amazing growth going into 2021. So that just gives you a quick insight into who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And, you know, if you have a chance to check out solacecares.com, I would encourage you to do that. And that is Solas Cremation.
Thank you, David. It's beautiful. And let's see if maybe if we stop sharing and then we'll throw that camera back on so we can see your beautiful face.
There you go.
There it is. And I'm going to turn it over to Silvia for a first round of some questions. And we're going to have a chat with these 3 remarkable founders. It's also a good time to push the Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom, and you can type in a question. We might miss it in chat. It's better to put it in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to it. Silvia, what are your thoughts? It's a lot of the other side of care.
Yes, so Fran, I was amazed by your sharing, and I can share that 2 days ago I received a patient whose wife died in November, and since then he has been neglecting his health because of the depression and being alone, not wanted to bother his kids. So I think the continuous of care when we are seeing a patient that is dying, how to support the family after that. I think we should do a doctor's order, like we order other treatments to patients. I think preventing the depression and the isolation after the death of a family member could be an amazing opportunity for your growth. And as care providers, I think is a great opportunity. My question is, if there's someone who needs more than a support group, if you offer also psychological support, one-on-one support or something like that.
So no, we do not. We offer the community for others to connect with people who understand what they're going through because they too are experiencing a death loss. And our approach is that grief is not a mental health issue, often doesn't warrant a professional person. And not to say that some people don't need that extra support as well. But we find for our community members that that connection with others is really imperative. And the interesting thing is, we have members that maybe have had a death loss from 5 years ago, that for whatever reason, a trigger in their life, or they've been suppressing their grief, all of a sudden enter our app. And one of the beauties of our app is you can actually filter others in the community, not only by their death loss, but when the death loss occurred. So if you're at a place 5 years into your journey, you can find someone else right around that marker too, who may have also experienced a death loss of a child or a spouse. And the one last point I'd like to bring in about, the follow-up care, it is a great opportunity for follow-up, especially, after a patient has died, to support the family. And we find that young adults are very difficult to support because they don't understand what this thing called grief is. And one of our communities is specific to young adult grief. So we have the 18, the 22-year-olds, the 24-year-olds, and they're connecting on a whole different level than those in our over 30s community. So, yeah, people sometimes at the time of the death loss don't realize that they may need this support. But when things get lonely and their friends and family members go back into their own lives, that's when they yearn someone who gets it. So thank you for that question.
Great. And regarding the memorials, Noha, I think is an amazing opportunity for, I live here, my family's in Uruguay, South America, and I have a sister in Australia, right? So I think it's a great opportunity today to the globalization of the world. My suggestion to you is, have you thought about doing this type of work with healthcare providers? Because we do also grieve our patients sometimes. Sometimes we live 6 months with a patient in the ICU, and then when we lose this type of patient with like such a relationship, it's also difficult. And we do some memorials for example, all organ donors every year, and it's like a healing moment for us. So I was wondering if you have thought about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I have talked to some hospitals that are actually doing memorials. They're organizing them themselves. I do think it is really important. Like you said, you build such a strong relationship with a lot of these people, and then it's a lot to take on. Yeah, and I'd love to talk to you more about what you guys have done as well. It's especially over the last year, it's so much and so heavy, and finding opportunities for people to come together to support each other through that is really important. Yeah, definitely.
And David, my question is, when are you coming to Ohio? I think it's a great way to make this time so hard easier. And so my question is that. You're muted.
Ask me again. What was the question? What was the first part?
When are you coming to Ohio?
Well, you know what? Right now we're as soon as possible. Let me put it that way. We're on the West Coast. We're in Portland, Seattle, and we just moved to LA. We do have expansion plans. We have a core proposition around cremation. Clearly, we want to. It's really interesting listening to Noha and just the whole idea of celebration and memorialization, and how do we give our families that kind of opportunity as well. But if there's an invitation, we're always open to conversations. So yeah, we'd love to move. We'd love to move there.
David, onto that point about going to Ohio, but also Silvia's obvious interests, and you mentioned that you have worked a little bit with hospices and hospitals. How have you found them to be? Have those been difficult relationships to build, or does it feel like there's an acknowledgement that this is a extension of service that makes sense, and relationships that the hospitals and the hospices, clearly hospices will probably be more amenable, but I'm curious about how those conversations have gone.
You know, it's really, I mean, it's a great question. And to this point, they've been very receptive and very welcoming to us. You know, because as you say, it's a continued part of their service to their families. Once families die, as I said, you know, it becomes very chaotic and crazy and lots of questions. And so we've tried to develop relationships where we're actually, it's a relationship where we're like, help us help you. Allow us to give you tools so you can help your families and make it a less distressful time. And that varies from city to city. You know, Portland's amazing. Seattle was still building relationships there. LA, we went into LA in the middle of COVID in just a crazy time. And so they were like hands wide open, arms wide open to us, you know, because, you know, it was just a chaotic time there. So, you know, it's a critical relationship. As I said, you know, it's part of our outreach to families. And so on the whole, I would say it's been amazing. Clearly, we're always looking for ways to develop that relationship, whether it's an institutional relationship or a grassroots one-on-one. But again, nothing but respect for these people, because they seriously have the hardest jobs. And they've made it really easy for us to work with them.
Well, that's great. I mean, that is a sea change, because there has been an allergic reaction to this notion of even just the word death.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, remind me, Silvia, when you started at the Cleveland Clinic, wasn't there this kind of motto that no one comes to the Cleveland Clinic to die, or something like that?
Some people say that this was something in the culture beneath, right? That we are a tertiary, quaternary place where sometimes the last resource, the last option, and we always strive to make the patient survive. So there were some people with that idea. So changing that to thinking death is not a failure from Dr. Gothrow, and building this end-of-life center in order to bring it as a normal part of our lives has been a switch in all these cultural changes we have done towards patient experience, in improving safety, quality. Is one more thing that we have been changing in other cultures. So
yeah, well, and Cleveland Clinic has been such an incredible leader in the space of embracing the fact that we are mortal, and we should talk about it. So I have a question for Fran. I did an amazing session with the COVID Grief Network recently, and with a couple of millennials that had lost somebody during COVID, and they were talking really specifically about COVID grief, and I like that it's really a specific type of grief, because it's a very specific type of loss. And we know how to resource people to some extent, for cancer and diagnoses and dementia and Alzheimer's and some other of these things that impact us. But it seems like it's a whole new, what have you learned about COVID specific grief? Seems like a whole new world.
Yeah, great question. And we work with the network, and we've done our video podcasts with them as well. They refer us, we refer them. So for Heal Grief and our philosophy, it's not so much what the cause of death was that creates different segments in our community for virtual support or for supportive service. It's the connectivity of this thing called grief. So for those that are seeking support specific to a COVID death, they are a resource within our community, because we understand there are very specific nuances to that. And although we'll embrace a specific death loss of a person, whether it's a spouse or a child or a parent, we don't, as I said, embrace or specialize in specific causes. So for example, if someone had a death loss of someone to cancer, and they wanted others that had a death loss specific to cancer, we might be able to refer them into an additional community. We understand that we're not for everybody, but we're hopeful that when people come to us, they're going to find the resource that they do need.
Yeah.
So Fran, I want to piggyback on this, because I think the most difficult thing during COVID was being alone or being unable to be there and the guilt around it. And moreover, when we were allowing people to come, sometimes they were sick and they were not able to come. And I experienced a family member asking me to whisper something in the ear of my patient before dying that, I wonder how that person is doing, thinking I was not able even to talk to my loved one. And with all these issues of, being isolated, I try to say, do you want to talk over the phone? And I bring the phone in, I will do that. And he said, no, I prefer not to. And I wonder if today is that guilt, So this is my question. Did you see something related to the inability of being there?
Yeah, it does. Yes, we have. And it does come up in our virtual group conversations. And then there are also those that may have not been able to travel to a funeral like Noha experienced when she was younger. So the overall sense of not being there is the connectivity in that conversation, as opposed to I couldn't be there because of COVID. So what we're trying to do is normalize that feeling of I wasn't able to be there. Our community members support each other in the guilt that might be there afterwards. And there's also guilt sometimes where someone dies unexpectedly and someone said, I went out with my friend, I didn't know. So there are so many secondary grief triggers to a death loss.
I mean, I think we're just now really building a robust language around grief, and it has been a pretty limited language for many, many years. One thing that I learned through working with you, Noha, and the COVID paper group was, and I think that COVID really just revealed this, which has always been there, is that funerals are cost prohibitive from not just the person who's paying for it, which we talk about, but the traveling to it. And I'm sure it's been discussed, but it seemed like it became really front and center that to have a virtual option is much more inclusive. It's more inclusive from the voice and the sharing in some ways, and not such a proscenium. But I'm curious about your thoughts on how this has improved access, and then what are some of the other gains? Obviously, there's some loss from not having an in-person experience. There's no question, but I want to hear like some more thoughts on the gains that you get from a virtual experience.
Yeah, they're very different. And I think there's pros and cons to both. Like you said, the inclusivity. Our first event that we did literally last March, what was most insightful for me was there was a woman who was in her 90s who had dressed up, all her makeup and jewelry on, and she was, dressed to the nines to be there and saying, oh, I see her. It was so great for her to feel like she could be there and see the person. And she was probably somebody who would not have been able to go even during normal times. And for her, her commentary afterwards was, thank you so much for doing this and for enabling me to be here for this. And so I think that's always the case, even without COVID. There's always a lot of people who can't be there. And pricing is part of it, mobility is another part, and health, and lots of other constraints. The other thing that really makes a difference is, I just lost my train of thought. There's something else that you mentioned about the pros and cons that I think of it sort of like a microwave versus a stove. There's pros and cons to each of them, but they're very different and unique tools. And when the microwave first came out, I heard this recently, right? People were, I don't know, it doesn't seem great. It's somehow lesser. It's lesser in some ways, but it's quite an advantage in many other ways. And I think similarly, virtual events just give you so many opportunities, especially nowadays. So much of our lives, we have recorded media. We have, things that, of the person or of other people wanting to share. We often see the grandkids or somebody in the family creating beautiful music or singing, and sometimes they pre-record it, sometimes they do it live. There's a lot that can be done through a virtual medium that cannot be done in a traditional in-person event. And that makes it incredibly powerful. And it's like you said, you can't move around and hug people, and that for sure is a loss. But on the other hand, there are a lot of other components that you can put in. And something we were seeing even before COVID is that people were starting to have more than one event. So there might be a small graveside burial with just the immediate family, and then there's an in-person event, and then there might be, a wake or a shiva, or even, in our family, a lot of the times there would be a whole weekend, getaway where we would all come together at the beach where we used to go as a family. And maybe there's the ashes scattering there. So oftentimes we were already having more than one event. And one of the opportunities moving forward is to have the virtual event be its own event that has a lot of these components in it. And that enables a lot of the out-of-towners and people who are not in the same setting to come together.
Yeah, I'm excited about the hybrid. So we're going to move into lightning round because we only have 8 minutes left. So keep your answers short. We've got a few questions to get through from our attendees. One is, what are the costs associated? I'm sure that there's variables, but the most simple explanation of costs associated with these 3 wonderful platforms. Go for it, Noah, and then David. Okay.
Yeah, so our memorial pages are free, and our virtual funeral and memorial services start at $750 and go up to $3,500, depending on the size of the event, the complexity, whether there's reception rooms, how much media is involved. So a whole bunch of different things around that.
Right. Perfect.
It's going to be very simple. We're $895 for everything. The only additional cost is for death certificates, which is a pass-through. We do not charge for that. And that's only because it depends on how many each family wants from, it could be 1 to 100. So, yeah. So $895.
And but you were going to do some urns and things. Is that still the case?
We're gonna do some urns. We do a free urn that comes with the $895, but we are looking at actually we are actually looking at launching urns in the next month or so, and that we're very excited about that. So
yeah, me too. Fran.
Yeah, so we're a 501c3. All of our services are free of charge. None of our members pay a fee to be part of the app or use the functionality of our website or participate in our virtual support. We rely on the generosity of donors and those that provide us with grant gifts.
Beautiful. And then last question kind of for David, and then Silvia might have one to follow, but this is from an attendee wondering about the model for, there's a couple questions in here, so wait for it. Okay. The model of Solace, or do you cremate yourself or do you work with local facilities is one part. The second part is kind of, are people interested in, and do you offer things like aquamation or water cremation? Are people interested in natural organic reduction, and or even the people that still might be interested in mushroom burial suits? Go.
Yes, so very good question. We do not cremate ourselves. We do have a partner. It's known in the trade, it's called a trade center, but for sake of understanding, it's a cremation center that partners with local funeral homes in the neighborhood that do not have the facilities. We vet them, we work with them, we develop standards. We're actually helping push them forward in terms of technology as well, which is part of our goal. So, and it works out perfectly. But in terms of the consumer experience, it's end to end. We communicate with the family, and then the cremation center acts as a white label for us. The second question was, we started with cremation because of just consumer choice at this point. The consumer has decided that cremation is where they want to be for now. But, you know, a couple of our cremation center partners actually offer other forms of disposition. And so we're very open. We want to go where consumers want to go, you know, if there's more natural, if there's more. So, you know, right now we started with cremation, but ultimately I think we'll end up in a different place.
Yeah. And there are new technologies all of the time.
That's right. That's right.
The wild world. Silvia, anything in closing?
No, I didn't understand exactly if you have facilitators in the groups, Fran, or not.
Yes, all of our groups have 2 facilitators involved in each group. That's our model. And one of the things that we do that's very different from the traditional models is we don't create the content. We allow the group to create the content. Because everybody is at a different place and maybe coming in with something that may have happened or triggered them for that particular day or week. So they're creating the content, we're just facilitating, opening the group up and facilitating.
That's great. So I wish many other doctors could hear this and see how much is the continuous care that we can provide. So I will try to spread the word.
Thank you.
Want to thank you, Silvia. Thank Noah and Fran and David for being here, and Kaylee Cole from behind the scenes producing it. And a huge thank you to people who showed up. I think it's a sunny day most places in the US right now. I think you're probably tired of Zoom, and yet you're still here. And that means the world to us. So thank you for tuning in. We'll be back soon. We haven't scheduled the next one. We might take a little bit of a summer breather.
I like that.
Let you all experience some less time on Zoom. So once again, thanks for joining. We'll see you soon. And I think that's it. We can hear some Bach.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Really nice to meet all of you.
Bye-bye.